Last week I attended GAMA Expo 2024, held for the first time in Louisville, Kentucky. This is an annual trade show hosted by the Game Manufacturers Association, GAMA, that is for people who have some sort of professional relationship in the game industry. The show is not open to the public. The show had about 2,700 attendees, or at least people who signed up for the event, and they included retailers, big group of retailers there, along with publishers, distributors, media people, licensing agents, designers, artists, all sorts of folks who have some sort of connection who are going to find out how to run their business better, or get new material to write about, like me, or new things to publish. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. The events at GAMA Expo are generally divided up into 3 sections. There's seminars in the morning, an exhibit hall in the afternoon, and game nights at night. And the seminars cover a lot of ground. I attended a number of seminars where publishers are talking about games that are coming out this year. That's what I'm interested in covering. But there's also seminars about how to work with the media or how to handle lawsuits, because that's an issue if you run a business, or how to work with trademarks, or how to license a game. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on there. There was also a designer day event that took place before GAMA Expo opened, where designers were given different challenges and try to work with different types of materials. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. And again, it's all about how to do your job better, how to succeed. That's the whole purpose of GAMA Expo. Me, I'm going to learn about new games so that I can write about them on BGG News. I've started posting already from the show. I'll put a link up there for the convention reports. You can see all those if you want. It's all the convention reports for all time, back to 2011, all the recent stuff. Well, it's in order by date, so you'll see that there. So I'm talking about games that I played at game nights or elsewhere, because there's lots of off-site things that happen as well, where an agent from a publisher shows up, they contact me, do you want to meet and talk about something? I'll show you what's coming up. And I do that. There's so many meetings that are taking place all around the city, I would say. Mostly the events took place in 2 places. KIC, it was the Kentucky International Convention Center. I'm not sure what the I is for. And the Galt House, a hotel that had a lot of rooms where the game night events took place, as well as a media first look room, as well as a giant bar area that was open late at night. There was not a lot I found that was open super late at night, but this was, and it had a lot of room for people to play games at super high tables. It was a nice setup, although very noisy. So I'll be talking about lots of games that are coming out. In general, let me give a few things that come to mind from all that I saw. There seems to be a general trend towards quick playing $20 games. I saw so many of these coming up on publishers, catalogs coming out this year. There's still plenty of large games, but those seem to be more of a Kickstarter thing for the most part. There were a few publishers there who run Kickstarters. They were talking about releases, but most of the stuff I saw was just relatively inexpensive games coming to market. There could be all sorts of reasons for that. Talk about them with some people where it's just you have less risk for the money that it costs to produce the game. You pack a lot more into a container because shipping costs are rising once again. So this reduces the cost per item that you're shipping. They're just a little easier to try. They're something to put out if you feel the market is a little risk averse and people are more comfortable buying a $20 game than a $50 game. So you have lots of $20 games out there. People just try them out. You get into more locations, sometimes more retail outlets, because if you go outside hobby stores and you're going into more educational markets or any other type of retailer, generally a lower price item is something that's going to appeal better to the casual game player. They don't necessarily know a lot of what's out on the market, but they see something that looks intriguing and pick it up, and there they go. So lower cost items work for that. There's lots of games I saw where it feels like I've seen this before, And now it's just someone putting their own twist on it. And you can't blame them, because if something is popular, you want to do your own thing sometimes. It can feel a little repetitive, such as every publisher having a golf-style card game. I saw Stool Pigeon, I saw Skullduggery from a publisher, Outset, that I had not known before. Pity on me for not knowing Outset. It's been out for a long time. But this is how I get introduced to companies sometimes, attending these types of shows. So these are both golf-ish style games where you're trying to adjust the sum of the cards that you have. And there's been so many of these released in the past few years. You can go back to Skyjo. That was a huge one in Europe that kicked off a huge trend there. But of course, then you can go back to Rat-a-Tat from Game Rights. And then of course, there's other ones before that. It's a very common game design that lots of people have played, and now you put your little twist on it for something different. And for someone who's looked at a lot of them, you just sometimes feel like, okay, I've seen this before. I try to be unjaded and approach this because, as I have often said, new games are for new gamers. Someone is going to see Stool Pigeon. They have not seen anything else similar to this, and they like it. They like the sound of it. They enjoy it. There they go. It's their first game that they're getting into, or at least something new to them. And far be it from me to poo-poo them for discovering something they like. It may be familiar to me, but that means familiar to everyone. I saw a fair number of games, in which you are trying to give clues to get people to guess something. Usually your identity, but also there's other iterations on it as well. R&R Games has come out with Secret Identity. It's a game released in France and elsewhere. You're giving clues, all right? You're generally a celebrity or no name of some sort. Voldemort, Mona Lisa, Angela Merkel, all sorts of people. Each player has 10 clue cards that they start with that are double-sided. So you have 40 images, and you can use up to 3 cards to give a clue as to who you are or not are, depending on where you put them on your player board. I am not. But you have only those 10 cards over the whole game. And you don't know who you're going to be each round. You just randomly draw a number. Oh, I'm number 6. Okay, look who that is. Howard the Duck. Now I have to clue that with whatever I have in my hand. So it's fun. You try to connect with people. I saw a fair number of games like this. All sort of the same spirit, but different. And so again, it's that familiar and yet it's new in the particular instantiation of that design. And it's neat to see, and yet when you see a ton of them, you can be like, oh yeah, here's another one of those. And I was talking with a designer publisher about the nature of categorizing games. And all of these are deduction. You're trying to convey information, other people try to deduce who you are. That all sounds familiar. You have all these games covered by deduction, and yet they have very different feels sometimes, and it feels like we're kind of doing an injustice to the games just to categorize them that way and leave it at that. Because deduction is clear to a lot of people, but if you go to the general public and you're like, this is an area control game, they will often be like, what? They don't know what that is, because it's not a term that casual game players might throw around a lot, or worker placement. This is not a thing. So it feels often there's this huge focus on mechanisms as you're marketing games, but what is the essence of the game? What's the feeling of the game? What's sort of the emotional connection or the expressive elements of it that come across? Because you could be a fan of romantic comedies, but there's lots of different romantic comedies. You know, like serious ones or goofy ones, or like the accidental, class issue. Like there's all sorts of ways to categorize them. And it's reductive to just be like, they're all romantic comedies, because they'll have very different feels, similar to how these are deduction games. But you might be fans of one and not the other because of how they come across, or just the elements in them and how you interact with other players. So it's interesting to talk about that with people, and you get ideas for like, is there different ways to categorize games on Board Game Geek and all sorts of other stuff like this. This is one of the main reasons to attend shows like this, is this interaction of people who you wouldn't expect to encounter. I talked a lot with one of the people from GAMA who does organization of events, and we're talking about all sorts of other things, but with the events. And so you find out more about different aspects of the industry and how things all fit together. It's really interesting for me to know how things work. I ran into someone, for example, who lives in Vietnam. I believe he's American. And he gave me a few Vietnamese games. He's just like, hey, you want to try these? Had some on him. I think he was an agent trying to market them, trying to publish them himself as well. He said he'd write an article about the Vietnamese game market for BGG News, which is nice because I know next to nothing about it. So I got some samples, and we'll see if I can give them a try. I find about things that I didn't know existed, such as the new Soulforge Fusion expansion, Battle for White Fang Pass. I didn't know this was out. I received no press release. We don't have a listing in BGG database. Publishers are sometimes not great at sending press releases for their material, or they just exist, and of course I don't know about them. As I mentioned with Offset, ran into Offset. What caught my eye was Rainbow, designed by Matthias Spahn, that came out from Piatnik a couple of years ago. I really like this game. It's a very simple 2-player game with a little bluffing set collection element. Again, I'm immediately going into mechanisms because that's what I'm familiar with. It's a little bluffing game where you're trying to collect a diverse group of colored cards, and you try to trick people so that they get knocked out of the round and you get to score what you have, or you can just figure out what's the right way to do things, a little press your luck element as well, to get the colors and score. I've played a half dozen times on the Piatnik version, and now that I'm like, oh, there's a US version from this company I never heard of before. Sure, now it's time to do a video on it, because it's not just a limited availability game, but something that I can help introduce to a larger audience. That's sometimes what I think about things. It's a thing I like, let me talk about it more. Especially when it's a design that most people probably have not heard of, or a company you haven't heard of. Again, I have no idea how big Outset is. They had a decent sized booth, but they were new to me. That's another reason for attending these shows, is I have a fairly decent overview, I think, of the European US hobby market. But then I'll go there and I'll see mainstream manufacturers or mainstream publishers that I don't know, and I get to find out about new stuff. Or someone like Mind's Invention, and that's how I died. Ran into them, didn't know them, took a catalog, talked with the guy. He's like, here, take this, try this game. Okay, so there we go. And that's how I died. I looked it up, it's got a BGG entry, but of course there's thousands of BGG entries that I do not know about. As much as I try to follow new releases, this came out, it's got a 2022 date on the back. Hadn't heard of it before. Similar to running into, again, R&R Games, The Plan. This came out in 2021. But of course, lots of things came out in 2021 that didn't get a lot of coverage because people were still kind of busy with their own thing. Not traveling a lot, not going around. So Frank was like, take this, try this out. Should be for your taste. Okay, we'll give that a go. What else? Chris Solis from Solis Game Design. Solus Game Studio had just released Spaceline, so he was giving demos, and he's like, oh, okay, Eric, this should be your type of thing. Try this out. It's like a battling system for 2 to 5 players. I like lots of 2-player games, like just the head-to-head, where you're trying to go against someone else. It's got unique powers with different factions, so each player has a faction. You only got 7 cards, so it's got this minimal element. And you try to figure out how to use them best and do all sorts of things. That was another common thing I ran across, where it's lots of card games with separate factions. You got unique powers. You're going to put them together in some clever way. It's all that type of stuff that I really like, but there's different ways people do it, and some you might like more than others. And so again, this is like the first taste where you go there and you get an overview, and sometimes you actually play things, as with Secret Identity, as with Ultimatch, which I wrote an overview of here. It's the game I liked best at the show that I can talk about. There's this new company that has a couple of games that just played a few rounds of and really dug, but they're not public yet. So I get things to write about in the future, stuff to think about and plan for and prepare for and just know it's coming. And again, like trying to look at trends in the industry, how things are coming about. Another reason for that show. Ran into someone who saw me reading during lunch and he's like, oh, you like books? How about Cat Magic? Would you like a copy? It's from my wife. I'm like, okay, sure. At worst, I put it in the little free library near me. But he'd also self-published a game, Cat Magic, that he'd been selling on his own. He'd been talking with people, trying to get distribution. And so you're trying to go to a show like this and find out how companies work. Because often it's hard to know when you're doing stuff on your own. Sure, I can figure out how to publish a game. Then what? How do I market it? How do I distribute it? Can I do anything? Can I license it? What am I going to do with this? I found it interesting that he didn't give me a copy of the game. He gave me a copy of the book. I don't write about books, but maybe I want to read about Cat Magic. Find out about it. Also, stickers. Also, you get a postcard for the game, the website. Go to that store. So anyway, there we go. Quick overview of GAMA Expo. Another thing I want to talk about, so talking about lots of tiny games coming out, all these similar style of games being marketed in different ways. Of course, there's just so many games hitting the market. And during COVID time, there was a big upswing with game sales, people staying at home, game containers selling as fast as publishers could get them in, but then there'd be a long lag time before there was a reprint because of production issues due to COVID. That's sort of calmed down now, and it seems like sales are somewhat, I'd say, trending down a little bit, just not severely, but just not rising the way they were. I know there were issues with outstanding inventory where companies just had too much stuff on hand because, of course, the more stuff you have sitting, the more money you have wasted. You spent money to produce that material, and now it's just in a warehouse somewhere. And you're paying warehouse fees. So you want to do less of that. You want to maybe do smaller print runs, or you lower prices, you do blowout sales, whatever it is, to keep that moving in order to get money back into the system. And it was interesting talking with a number of publishers about that, where sometimes they really know what's going to hit. They have a broad range, broad catalog, and yet they're like, this is the game line that really just funds our entire company. And yet you've got these half dozen other games. Why are you doing those and not just the one that funds your company? Why not focus on the hit instead of all this other stuff? And there's a couple reasons for doing that. It's interesting, again, just figuring out how all this works. Part of it is, of course, you don't necessarily know that something is or is not going to be a hit. Maybe something takes off that you did not expect. You like the design, it fits your audience, you publish it, you sell a few thousand, it doesn't take off anywhere. Okay, well, at least we earned our money back, and that's that. Because often these companies have lots of employees that are on staff, and you need to pay for them all, and maybe that hit, well, you don't want to ride that hit forever. You don't necessarily know how long it's going to last. Someday the market might drop out, people suddenly stop buying, and then what else do you have? And so you're trying to often keep coming out with the hits and yet build up something that's coming next. And so you can diversify your income stream and have support for whatever you're doing and, keep your business safe and healthy. Ideally, find something else. There's lots of times as well where you have this audience of people who like a particular style that you're doing. You're going to license something from another company because you've worked with them in the past. They have something that's sort of your style. You're not sure if it's really right for your market, but you keep a good relationship with that publisher so that when they do have that hit, that thing that you know is perfect for your market, ideally they'll come back to you again because you have this solid relationship with them. That's what happens as well sometimes. So it's a little overview of GAMA Expo to give you a sense of what the trade show is like, at least for someone in the media with my background and taste, like the very particular point of view for GAMA Expo. Again, lots of people have different reasons for going there. I spoke with someone who is a licensing agent for publishers, where they essentially find out what publishers are looking for from all over the world. Works with a lot of South American, Asian, European, all sorts of publishers I don't even know about necessarily. They're trying to license things and find what's appropriate for those publishers, and then they'll go to other trade shows and go to other trade shows. And the person was going to a trade show, I think in Singapore, a little gaming event, and then after that they're going to this other one. They're just traveling constantly, trying to make connections and make deals so that publishers can get the games they want. Because a publisher is often deluged with submissions, and then they have to evaluate all of them. But if they have an agent who already knows what the publisher is looking for, that agent does that first pass sometimes and then sends them things that they're more likely to find exactly to their taste. So interesting. Going there, talking about all these people, getting an overview of what the industry is like, and discovering Louisville, which has a lot of bourbon places. Not my thing, but it's all there. If you want to go in the future and you work in the game industry, you want to sign up for GAMA, and maybe I'll see you there in the future.